In today's episode of the Pathmark Presents podcast, I am here with a very interesting guest, with Austin Black, who is the senior growth marketer and business developer at a very interesting company, head of marketing and business development for White Narrow. And today we're going to be learning they're playing in a very interesting space. The interesting piece is they haven't been in there for short. They've been coining the industry, I would say. So let's learn about White Narrow today. So Austin, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Lucas. Nice to be here.
Very good. So I've introduced you guys, very, let's say, high level. Maybe you can give us a real insight into, what White Narrow is all about and who you're serving.
Sure. So Wide Narrow is a SaaS company, and we are a B2B SaaS company helping analyst teams across the globe, whether that be competitive intelligence, market intelligence, regulatory, strategy, innovation, etc. So we help them with their intelligence workflow. Mm-hmm. Now, we started in 2006. The backstory is we were a consulting company. We're headquartered in Stockholm, Sweden. Now we have employees all over the globe. Most of us are remote, and we have our big office in Stockholm. And our co-founders decided to start this consulting company helping intelligence teams at mostly large corporations to improve their intelligence processes. So think of it like a corporate strategy and business planning type of business model. Mm-hmm. And very early on, they'd go and they'd do these seminars all around the world to these companies with, analysts, and usually large corporations have analysts in little cells around the world. So you have some in Brazil, some in the UK, some in Eastern Europe, whatever. And they go do these workshops. And our customers started asking us, well, this is great. I love this process, but we have no tools to actually implement it. And this was right when SaaS software, Salesforce was taking off like crazy at this point. And this was 15 years ago. So we decided behind the scenes to build our own intelligence platform. Started out very simple, kind of minimum viable product. And organically, it just took off. All these consulting customers said, "Oh, that's great. We pay good money for this consulting. Let's use this software to implement it." And so that was really successful. And 6 years ago, we decided to stop the consulting side of the business from a revenue perspective and dedicate full time to growing the SaaS side of the business. So that's where we're at today.
Seems to be like a running theme on our show where the products that are being grown out of consulting or agency, they really have a real grip. They go very quick to product market fit, I would say, than many other cases. Very interesting. Who would you say you're serving? Like, what would be sort of a typical company, a typical client that you would be working with?
Yeah, sure. So there's no industry specific niche per se. So we work with life sciences companies, tech companies, pulp and paper, automotive, manufacturing, you name it, we work with them across that spectrum. But the key is that these organizations need to have an analyst in their organization. So generally that comes with some level of either size or funding. So our initial customer base was pretty much all, let's say, the 5,000 largest companies globally. Mm-hmm. We grew mostly in Europe initially, so the Fortune 1000 of Europe, and then transitioned to the US where we had a similar growth journey. We are now starting to bring on a number of VC-funded startups that are scaling super quick, and so they're bringing on research analysts, competitive analysts, strategists at smaller size companies than we would traditionally have worked with. But does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. Gives some insight. What I'm curious though is who would be raising their hand? Like who's saying we need something like White Narrow? Like is that the analyst? Is that the CEO coming in and says, hey, we need to empower our analysts? Like what's the story typically?
Yeah, sure. So generally what's happening is the CEO or some executive leadership is saying, hey, we need to be ahead of trends from a strategic perspective, or this competitor just came out of the blue and just gobbled up a huge amount of market share, or wait a second, our competitor just put, $560 million into the startup. We didn't even know about them. Mm-hmm. It usually the impetus for creating an analyst type function comes from something like that. And then these organizations hire competitive intelligence analysts, market intelligence analysts, directors of strategy, etc. And we serve those individuals. So what we found is the world changes super quick. It's more agile than ever from an innovation perspective. And even what you would consider more legacy organizations, larger, slower moving, traditionally entities, they're realizing they need to be ahead of the innovation cycle, or competitive cycle, or whatever it may be with how the world's going. And so traditionally, these analysts will go and do extensive research, partner with reporting agencies to get market reports, or monitor a lot of news. Now you have a lot of social media monitoring. But the problem with that is this data is all over the place. I mean, it's literally in multiple languages and media sources all over the world. It's flowing out in terabytes and terabytes of data every day. It's impossible for humans to comprehend it. It's not physiologically possible. And so that's step one, is how do you solve the information screening problem? There's too much noise, and we needed to provide a mechanism for analysts to be able to see through the noise, basically. So that's step one of the Wide Narrow platform. We call it the screening process. The second step is, okay, so I have all this information and I know things about my organization because I have expertise. So what I want to do is take these components of information, let's say I identified some trend really early on, and put it into the context of how that impacts my business. There were no tools out there. The only tools that existed were project management tools. And we said, what if you could create these collaborative workspaces where analysts could get together no matter where they lived in the world, share their insights, essentially crowdsource the intelligence, so that you get all the valid perspectives and you can start to make decisions based on this intelligence. That's step two of the three-step process. Think of these like modules in the platform: module one, screen; module two, refine. And then the third is, okay, now we have really good insights, but we need to tell people about them. People who can make these decisions need to know. And so the previous state of intelligence was, okay, I'm going to write a lengthy report, maybe save it as a Word document or a PDF, and I'm going to share that with someone. The problem you face there is it's a static document. By the time it's written, it's aged out generally. And so the validity is less there. And also, honestly, and this is an unfortunate truth, people don't always read them. and that sucks because there's a lot of work put into these. Or the other option is, we're just going to share news as it comes in. Well, I don't know if you do any investing or really monitoring of anything in the world, marketing trends. It seems like every week there's a new mechanism for paid ads attribution or a new social channel you should be advertising in, right? It's almost impossible to keep up. And if you just randomly shared a bunch of news articles with your CEO, probably wouldn't go well. And so we created the third module, the reporting module, as a unified distribution mechanism. So you literally have these little Lego bricks, or these what we call posts, these rectangular pieces of insights. You can drag and drop them all over the platform. And in one swoop, you can turn that insight into a report, a newsletter, a dashboard that actively and dynamically updates. We have AI layered in to allow for some efficiency gains in that regard, draw kind of correlations between different topics. And so ultimately, to your point earlier on about why do consulting businesses build SaaS products that have generally a higher success rate of product market fit, I think it's because the pain points are so obvious. And so we built this to solve that pain point. And essentially we are launching a big awareness campaign on this concept of what is the next 15 years of intelligence. And we're calling it dynamic intelligence, this premise of keeping up with the innovation cycle and adding efficiency to the analysis process.
Sharing a concept like that that you were describing, and looking at the flip side, the people who are starting to use this, how do they? What's the journey of somebody getting to know you folks and getting started? Like, what would be sort
Sure.
of the channels that they would be walking through? Maybe you can give us an overview on that.
Yeah, sure. So I will speak to my personal experience on this because it's been really educational, I think is the best word to put it. My background was as a systems analyst and then ended up getting into the growth world, sales, marketing, and loved it, mostly in the B2B enterprise SaaS space. And so traditionally, you have a very structured marketing funnel. You know where your prospects are, and it's predefined target base, buyer personas, etc. In our case, we started out with competitive and market intelligence, and how we might find those individuals traditionally is we would go to conferences. There's a conference called the SCIP, SCIP conference. There's a number of other analyst intelligence related conferences across the globe. Our sales team would go there, build awareness, network, have good discussions, and build awareness that a tool like this exists, because we learned, and I learned very early on, there is not awareness that a tool like this exists, which is why the vast majority of people are still writing 70-page PDF reports or doing a PowerPoint that ages out, etc. And so that's really mission number one in the intelligence space, is just build awareness that platforms in general like this exist. So when COVID hit, that created an interesting transition for us, because our traditional lead gen process was much more outbound. We did a lot of conferences. We did a lot of B2B, conversations, a lot of referrals. We're very fortunate to have an almost negligible amount of churn, and our organic growth from upsells within our customer base is huge. And so we tend to get a lot of referrals. When COVID hit, it made that interpersonal relationship component really hard. So we did a 180 flip to inbound. And so now we're doing a lot of digital ads. Generally, those ads are around thought leadership, around this dynamic intelligence concept. Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Google ads and Microsoft ads strategically. We transitioned to HubSpot at the beginning of the year. We rebuilt our website entirely. We set up full, inbound marketing funnels, and it's been a really interesting process where we traditionally would have had a handful of good solid leads every month. Let's say in 2019, we're probably going to end the year with 15xing that amount per month. So it's been a really good process. Yeah.
Very cool. Super interesting. That gives us definitely a perspective on the evolution of how you guys have been evolving, sharing this story. What I would be curious is to switch gears a little bit and learn about you as a marketer a little bit, right? It's actually quite interesting, because you guys are all about serving relevant content to the right people with the right context and the right depth. How do you personally also, there's a lot of marketing content out there. There's a lot of stuff to digest, to switch, for example, from an outbound to an inbound driven organization. How do you decide what to read? Like, what's your way of finding your way through the marketing noise out there?
Yeah, so I have an unfair advantage because I use Wide Narrow to do it.
I was nearly thinking that.
And I'm not paying the licensing fees for it, so it's very fortunate. But on a greater context, even within Wide Narrow, our analysts need to know, generally speaking, what's interesting to them, what sectors to look at, whatever. So what I've done is set up feeds from Twitter for some of the influencers in the space that are kind of leading the charge. So I monitor Twitter a good bit, a little bit of LinkedIn. I have a couple of people I follow consistently through there. In terms of news sources, I tend to follow industry blogs that are very niche. So I'm a big fan of kind of cutting edge marketing tech. And so I follow a lot of startups doing marketing automation. They tend to publish really solid content that doesn't get a lot of organic search traffic because they're too small, but it's really interesting leveraging AI in your marketing process, a lot of conversion optimization stuff. So I love to read blogs about not only landing page conversion, but a lot of copywriting and messaging blogs. Some great follows on Twitter as well. Long story short, all of that comes into Wide Narrow. What's cool about Wide Narrow is it learns from me. And this is not a pitch about it. It just is fortunate because it's a big problem. If I was to just sit on Twitter all day, I would probably still not keep up. So it learns from me. So it's going to, as I what we call qualify or reject stuff, it learns what my favorite sources are, and I can essentially block the sources that I'm not reading anymore. Yeah.
Makes sense. I was pretty sure while you were explaining the product that this is the way you learn. So
Yeah,
very cool.
exactly.
Very cool. Very last question before we already flew through the interview. I would love to do a little bit of time travel with you. Go back to Washington State University.
Yes.
Basically, you have the world of marketing in front of you, or the world of, for your career. Like, what's the one advice that you would give yourself if you would speak back to your own self just after uni?
So the word I would use is agility. I think my journey, and I'll keep this brief, but I started working pretty young. I picked up garbage, and then built trails in the wilderness and did crazy jobs, ropes courses, and then got into college and said, wow, tech companies are getting a lot of VC funding. That wasn't happening before that. Like SaaS was really just taking off. And I said, probably a good place to be from a career perspective. Where in that do I fit? Okay, I can't sit at a computer and code for 12 hours a day. I can't do it. I tried. But understanding technology as an information systems major, but with a specialization in growth marketing seemed like a good idea. So I ended up getting a job at Washington State University, launching their online MBA program in the marketing department. And I honestly I went to school with the core intention of being either a data scientist of some type or a developer. And the world just didn't work that way for me. And I had to be agile. I then moved into a chemical compliance company where I was an implementer for Salesforce. And I got an offer from the CEO to join the marketing and sales team. I didn't want to do that. That was not my life path. I didn't think that was my world, but it hit me in the face again. And I did it because it was a great offer. It was interesting. I went into the cannabis industry, an industry that you would never think about, I suppose, as a growth marketer, the majority of the world, especially in a very, very young cannabis industry in the United States, and built enterprise software for regulatory organizations within cannabis, which is a huge thing to regulate the industry. And now working with some of the largest companies doing competitive and market intelligence software. So you just have to be agile. And I suppose one final takeaway to that would be, look at how marketing has progressed. Go do a Google search. What percentage of that page was ads 5 years ago compared to what percentage of that page is ads today? On certain results, you'll have 70% of total page be advertising, because it's the monetization model for the search engines and the social media engines. And so if you are solely an SEO individual and you neglect paid, there's a potential for the validity of what you're doing and the ROI of what you're doing to be cannibalized, and that sucks. But the agility is necessary to be a well-rounded growth marketer in the world today, I think.
Yeah. Very cool. That gives a very, very nice finish to the conversation. I want to give you the very last word. If somebody would be forgetting all that we discussed about Wide Narrow today, what's the one thing that they should remember?
Yeah, I think question what you're doing today as an analyst, and ask yourself if you can be more dynamic and what impact that will have on, one, making yourself look like a rock star in your organization, but two, what tangible ROI benefit could being early to trends, having an impact directly on the C-suite, having an impact on sales through sales enablement? What impact could that have on your organization? And if it makes sense to become more dynamic, feel free to come to us. We're happy to do a strategy session and see how we can help you make that happen.
Awesome. Thanks for being guest on Pathmark Presents.
Awesome. Thank you.